Welcome to what lurks outside of the basement. I'm your host, Kitty. I'm your guide into the strange, the horrific, and even the unbelievable. Tonight, we explore one of the most unsettling tales ever to circulate on the internet. A story that has gained a life of its own, with every twist and detail burrowing into the darkest corners of the mind. It's known as the Russian sleep experiment. Is it true? Is it a legend? That's for you to decide. But beware, this story has a way of lingering, as if it's watching, waiting to haunt your dreams. Let's rewind to a time of shadowy secrets and Cold War paranoia. It's the late 1940s, a time when scientists in the USSR were exploring boundaries that we can hardly imagine. Stories surfaced about experiments that pushed beyond the limits of mortality, driven by a desire to gain an advantage over their enemies. But this experiment was something else entirely. The goal was to explore the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation on the human mind. Could they find a way to eliminate the need for sleep? After all, soldiers who don't need to sleep could march on for days, fight without rest, or work tirelessly in factories. It was a revolutionary idea, but it came at a terrifying cost. They chose 5 prisoners, labeled as enemies of the state, political dissenters, promised freedom if they could survive 15 days without sleep. They were locked in a small, windowless room. Their only companion was a microphone, which the scientists used to monitor every single sound. They were provided with books, enough food to last a month, and even a makeshift toilet. But the room had no beds, no comfortable chairs, no place to rest. And to keep them awake, the scientists released a specially formulated gas, a stimulant that would, in theory, prevent sleep. For the first few days, things went as expected. The prisoners chatted among themselves, told stories, and seemed in relatively good spirits, laughing occasionally as they spoke about their families and their lives before imprisonment. The scientists watched, making notes, intrigued by how quickly the subjects' normal behavior began to change. By the third day, the effects of sleep deprivation began to show. Their laughter grew sporadic, with longer silences between their conversations. At times, they seemed lost in thought, and at other times, they whispered conspiratorially to each other about the scientists' motives. On day 4, the subjects began exhibiting intense paranoia. They would sit in silence, occasionally glancing toward the mirrored walls as if suspecting the scientists were watching every movement and every thought. That paranoia grew more severe. By day 5, they stopped talking to each other altogether. Instead, they took turns pacing the room, muttering incomprehensible phrases, sometimes pounding on the walls or pressing their faces against the glass. The scientists began to wonder, what would this experiment reveal about the human mind when it's pushed to its breaking point? By the 6th day, everything escalated. The subjects started screaming one by one and then all at once. Their screams weren't just cries of fear or frustration. They were primal, Gretel shrieks. It was as if they were desperately fighting something unseen, something lurking inside them. One by one, they screamed until their voices gave out, raw and unbroken. Then, silence. The scientists listened, horrified yet mesmerized. The only sound in the chamber was the soft hum of gas circulating. But none of the subjects spoke or made any attempt to communicate for hours on end. A researcher whispered to his colleague, "Perhaps they're dead." But another scientist reminded him of the deal. No one was to open the chamber until 15 days had passed. On day 9, the scientists noticed an odd sound, faint scratching coming from the chamber. When they tried to communicate, they received no response. They checked the oxygen levels and found that the subjects were alive, but incredibly still, as if each one was frozen in place. On day 10, the silence was broken by a single voice. One of the subjects whispered into the microphone, his voice almost pleading, "We no longer need to sleep." The scientists exchanged looks, questioning whether they should end the experiment, but they pressed on, curiosity overriding caution. And then the 12th day, something shifted. The researchers heard another faint whisper, "Open the door." But the tone was different, cold, demanding, almost inhuman. When they asked what was happening, the same voice replied, "We are the darkness that lurks in all of you. Open the door and we'll show you." Terrified, but determined to document every last moment, the scientists agreed to open the chamber. What they found inside defied comprehension. Each subject was horrifically mutilated, their bodies torn and twisted, yet they remained alive. They had gouged out parts of their flesh, ripped open their own abdomens, exposing muscle and organs. But perhaps most disturbing of all, they didn't appear to feel pain. Instead, they grinned, almost relieved as they looked at the researchers, whispering, "Turn the gas back on. We don't want to sleep." One of the researchers, horrified, demanded the subjects explain why they'd done this to themselves, but the prisoners only laughed. A dark, twisted laugh that seemed to echo around the room. Their bloodshot eyes started wildly pleading for more gas, as if sleep was a fate far worse than their self-inflicted wounds. The scientists ordered guards to sedate the subjects, fearing they were moments from death. But as the guards entered, the subjects attacked with unrestrained savagery. It took several guards to subdue each subject, but even under multiple sedatives, they fought with a strength that defied logic. 2 of the subjects died in the process. Their bodies were too damaged to withstand the sedatives, but the remaining subjects clung to life, their eyes wild with terror as they screamed, "I must stay awake, I must stay awake." Only one subject survived until the end. His body was shattered, but he whispered something that would forever haunt those who heard it. He said, "I am the thing you fear in the dark that waits inside each mind. In the place only dreams dare to go, I am what you've tried to hide." The experiment was shut down, records sealed. The surviving researchers were sworn to secrecy. No official record of this Russian sleep experiment exists. To this day, it remains a whispered tale, a chilling story of science pushing too far. But Whether it happened or not, the story of the Russian sleep experiment taps into our deepest fears that under the right conditions, we too might glimpse the madness that lurks within. So, was it real? Some say it was merely Cold War propaganda. Others insist that it was an internet hoax born in the early days of creepypasta. But there are those who believe it was real. What do you believe?